and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Be seated. So as I said at the start of this service this year, in our discipleship services, we're going to be looking at what's called a short guide to the duties of church membership, which was written in 1954 by the Archbishops of York and Canterbury at the time, in a response to the General Assembly, the General Synod, the Church Assembly, which is the equivalent to the General Synod, in response to their requests for the Archbishops to say what it means to be a member of the Church. And so over this year we're going to be looking, as I said, phrase by phrase, through that short guide, seeing what it says to us practically about how we can apply each of those to our lives. But before we go into the details of that short guide, we first need to ask the question, why? Why should coming to church place any obligations or duties on us? A question that sometimes gets asked. So this month we're going to be thinking about that question, and then next month we're going to be looking at the question of whose duties they actually are. So first we need to think about where that attitude comes from, the attitude that says that why should coming to church place any obligations or duties on us. Why can't we just turn up to church each week, or however often we want to come to church, just have an hour or so here and then go away and not think about it for the rest of the week? Why should coming along place any obligations or duties on us at all? Well, one of the places that sort of attitude comes from is the mindset of the world in which we live in, which is, and one of the major features of that mindset is the idea of consumerism, the idea that we are all consumers of products, and church then just becomes another product that we consume. Church, in this view, is sometimes seen as just another form of entertainment, just like going to the cinema or going to the theatre or going to a concert. And if you went to the cinema or a theatre or a concert and then afterwards you were told that because you'd been to see that performance you then had to do some things in return, you'd be a bit off-put by that. And the same view gets carried through to church. Church is just another form of entertainment where people gather together, focus around something that happens at the front, some sort of performance, usually with people dressed in funny clothes, and you just kind of watch it and then go home afterwards. There's no obligations or duties placed on viewing entertainment. I think this is one of the reasons why cathedral worship is often cited as being one of the growth areas of church attendance. Lots of people like to go to a cathedral, and I think one of the reasons they do that is because they don't really have to get involved with what happens in a cathedral. There's already plenty of things that are done by other people in those services and around those services. There's lots of people that do all the jobs that need doing. So therefore, if you go along to a cathedral, you're not likely to be pounced upon and asked to be part of a rota, which is often quite likely in a parish church as soon as you walk through the door. So cathedral worship is one of those ones where there is very little obligation on the people that attend to be involved in making it happen. But normal parish church life is different. It's not like going to the cinema or going to a theatre or going to a concert. There is a participation that's involved with coming along. But because we view it through the lens of consumerism, we often also critique the church service in that way, or church life. We will often not like the music there is, or the preaching, or the brand of coffee that's served afterwards. And for some of those reasons, people will stay away from particular churches. We are used to picking and choosing the entertainment that we want to consume, and church becomes part of that too. But there is also a wider effect of this consumerist worldview when it comes to church, and that's a question that consumerism raises in our minds, and that's the question, what do I get out of it? It's the basis of our evaluation for things in the world through consumerism. What benefit is it to me to have this product or to do this thing? And that attitude gets carried into church as well. Church is seen as offering a product, and if we don't like it, or we don't like parts of it, or we don't want to pay the price for it, then we walk away and simply don't consume. What do I get out of it is often a question that's asked about things in the world, and can be asked about church too. So therefore the idea that coming along to church places an obligation or a duty on us is alien, because we're thinking about what we can get out of it rather than what we can contribute to it. So viewing church with a consumerist mindset means that we're looking to get something from church rather than giving something to it. And even if we are prepared to undertake some obligations or duties, we want the best deal for ourselves. We want to give the least of ourselves for the best possible benefit to ourselves. So that's one place that attitude of wondering why we have obligations and duties comes from, that consumerist mindset. But another reason we might have that question is because of a misunderstanding of what grace means. We know that grace is a central tenet of Christianity, that God achieves salvation for us because we can't do it for ourselves, that God's grace and love comes to us, comes down to us, and we don't have to work ourselves up towards God. So when we look at other religions, when we look at Muslims or Jews or Hindus, when we look at their regular daily prayers and practices, we rightly see people who are trying to earn salvation and trying to earn favour with God. And we rightly thank God that that's not what Jesus came to teach us, that Jesus came to teach us that we can't earn our way into God's favour, we can't earn our salvation, that God himself has to come down to rescue us, and we rightly thank God for that. However, we might then make the mistake of thinking that because we don't need to do anything to be saved, that means we don't have to do anything once we've been saved. There is perhaps a less theological version of this, where we think of God as being loving and caring and welcoming everyone. So therefore we don't actually need to do anything at all, because God will always love us and always welcome us. We might even think that we are slightly better than the world in general. We might say, I've been baptised, I've been to Sunday school, and I turn up to church occasionally. That's all that God really wants from us. So a consumerist mindset and a misunderstanding of God's love and grace can both lead to that attitude that thinks that going to church doesn't place any obligations or duties on us. But instead of thinking in terms of consumerism or misunderstanding grace, we need to think instead in terms of covenant. And this is quite a topical word, because around this time, lots of Methodist churches will be having covenant services at the start of the new year to celebrate what God has graciously done for us and acknowledge our obligations and duties that result from his grace. And we see that coming through our readings. In Romans, Paul has been teaching us and telling us and reminding us that we are all sinners, that we can't do anything to earn God's favour, but that while we were still sinners, Jesus died for us, and so that through faith in him we might be saved. God does this, Paul tells us, not because we deserve it or because we have earned it, but because of God's love for us. And so in Romans 12, Paul says, "Therefore, I urge you, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices." Paul says, in view of God's mercy, in view of what God has done for us, we ought to offer our bodies as living sacrifices. Paul does not say, in view of God's mercy, just sit back, relax, you don't need to do anything else. Instead, he says we should offer ourselves as living sacrifices. And then he tells us not to conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but to be transformed by the new renewing of our minds. If you were around today, Paul would point to the pattern of this world, and one of those patterns would be the pattern of consumerism. Do not be conformed to that pattern of consumerism, but have your minds transformed by God. Renew your mind so that it conforms to him, not to the world. In view of his mercy to us, we ought to offer our bodies as living sacrifices. In John chapter 15, in our second reading, Jesus uses that famous image of the vine and the branches. He talks about that sovereign choice of God in grafting branches into his vine, that grace where we don't deserve to be part of the vine, but he brings us in. But then he also speaks of those branches needing to be fruitful by obeying his commands. There is both grace and obligation given in that image. We are graciously grafted into the vine, and because we are part of the vine, we are called to be fruitful. This is about the covenanted relationship of God with his people. God comes and saves us and rescues us through his grace, through his love, and through his mercy, not because of anything that we deserve, but because he has done that. We then have an obligation, a duty to give our lives as living sacrifices, as fruitful branches. That is our response to God's gracious movement towards us in saving us. So this is all about what covenant is. God covenants and promises to save us through Jesus, and we in return agree to be part of his people. So he saves us by his grace, and in response his people commit themselves to obeying his commands. So through the rest of the year we're going to be thinking about what those commands are and how they apply to our lives. And next month, before we do that, we'll think about who those obligations rest on, who are the people that are in that covenant relationship with God. But this month, let's thank God for his grace and his mercy in saving us even though we don't deserve it. And let's commit ourselves to being part of his covenant people.